Welcome to the Arena Decklist Podcast. I'm Jerry Thompson. Here with me, as always, is Brian Gottlieb. And here, Black Lives Matter. If you disagree with that, feel free to just click that back button, unsubscribe, and be done with us. Please and thank you.
Agreed.
That's it. That's all I got. I guess we should actually do a show this week. We didn't do one last week. It's been difficult to try and focus on creating content in times like these. I mean, not just like Corona and being quarantined and separated from everyone, but with all of the protests that are rightfully going on and everything. It's just like my mind has been elsewhere. It is very difficult for me to actually concentrate on building Magic decks and Magic formats and all that sort of stuff. And last week was even a time when we should have thrived really with like a B&R announcement. So like if that doesn't give you an idea of like how stressful and anxious we are right now, I hope that does.
Yeah, it's challenging circumstances to be sure. You said very clearly where we stand. I certainly second that. Supporting all the folks out there protesting right now. Black Lives Matter 100%. Get gone if you're not with that. But there's this weird tension where I want to be able to give people peace too. I want to be able to give people a distraction because this is a long fight and we're going to fight for months, years, however long it takes. So there has to be a degree of balance in our approach and we have to stay strong, stamina high, keep going. So let's allow these little diversions into Magic cards. But like you said, a lot of my mind space has been elsewhere for a few months now, quite frankly. But there were some big events to draw us back in, and I am excited to talk about them and get your opinion on them. So why don't we do that? Why don't we move on to some Magic cards?
Stamina high? Keep stamina high? How do you even get stamina too high?
What is the stamina you speak of?
I start with stamina low and it goes lower, buddy. So I don't understand.
Yeah.
Anyway.
I know where you're coming from. We're going to do our best, though, to stay engaged and rejuvenated and fighting for as long as humanly possible, as long as it takes.
Yeah, so Magic-wise, content-wise, I'm going to do my best. Know that if I'm putting out a piece of content, I certainly am trying my best. But, you know, if I'm not super active, if I'm not responding to your messages or like, you know, talking about new decks, or maybe I take a week off from writing or whatever, like, please just be okay with that. You know, like, just understand that we're all going through a lot of crap right now.
I will say our community has been basically uniformly supportive of our decisions and our approaches. So I just want to give a shout out to everyone who listens for having our back. I do feel like this entire listenership does have our back when it comes to these type of things. You know, they respect us as people. They respect that we're pulled in other ways sometimes. And I do really appreciate that.
Yeah, they're the best. Not close.
For
anyway, sure. M21. New core set. Also, some stuff just got banned. Fires of Invention, Agent of Treachery. Companion got nerfed a bunch. So the format right now, I guess, like leading up to the Pro Tour thing. What is it? What is it called?
I think it's Players Tour again. You ask me this every time, and I still don't know every single time you ask me.
I didn't know if they changed the branding or whatever. Anyway, so yeah, there's a Pro Tour thing, a PT. This weekend using the old format, which is always kind of awkward during preview season. It's really tough for me to like care about the old format when a new set is on the horizon. I'm already like brewing decks and thinking about it and stuff. But the old format basically feels like right after Oko got banned, just everything is like super tame, and that's a good thing, I think. And that opens the door for a lot of these cool core set cards to actually make a splash.
Yeah, I think that's true once the set arrives. As far as the present moment, these bans did nothing to rekindle my interest in Standard. Like there wasn't even usually there's a moment where I'm like, okay, let's think about this. And I was just like, oh, we just rewound and added Shark Typhoon to the format. And that's not doing a whole lot for me. So I haven't re-engaged with Standard. I was pretty disappointed with how conservative the approach was. I guess coming up on rotation, you can see why you would take a conservative approach, but I was really hoping for something that would rejuvenate my interest in Standard. Didn't work for me. Sounds like it didn't work for a lot of people. I have never seen this level of apathy for a PT. I mean, nothing even close to it. It doesn't matter what the timing was, doesn't matter what the set was, doesn't matter what the format was. Apathy is at an all-time high when it comes to what's supposed to be the flagship event for Magic the Gathering.
Yeah. Yeah. You're talking about stamina being high. I'm living that apathy life right now.
You and a lot of other people, especially when it comes to this standard format. But there are shakeups on the horizon. This is a powerful core set. And it's funny because you think back to M20, core set 2020, we were pretty lukewarm on it. Like, certainly we identified some powerful cards. We were really into the sideboard stuff, but we didn't think it was a real game changer. And now in retrospect, probably the most impactful core set ever.
Until now.
Maybe until now.
I'm calling it.
Here. Maybe.
I'm calling it. So there are a lot of cards. Not a lot of cards have been previewed. I think we're sitting at about like 70 out of 200 and something. But we're going to try and talk about the ones that we want to talk about, probably the most impactful ones, and then maybe cover some of the stuff that we missed last week or on the next week. Just because I don't think we're going to have time to talk about every single card that we think is going to actually make an impact in Standard.
Yeah, let's just hop around a little bit, and then once we have the full set, we'll probably come back and give more in-depth insight to the big picture implications of this set.
Yeah, so let's get it. We are on Scryfall. We have sorted by image and by color, and I'm just going to kind of scroll through here and talk about things that catch my eye. Cool?
Sounds good.
Baneslayer Angel, I think, is mediocre.
Yeah. I mean, it's crazy to say that, but creatures that don't impact the battlefield immediately don't matter right now. Not at 5 mana, not with Teferi around. Now, is there a window once Teferi rotates to start reconsidering these cards? I think so. I think you can give them a look. There's still some real impediments, and that also assumes that no more impediments will come along in the meantime as we wait for Teferi to leave the format.
Right.
Stuff like Brazen Borrower is still around. It's just so many low-cost ways, not only cost in terms of mana, but cost in terms of deck building cost to answer a card like Baneslayer Angel right now. Feels outdated, feels outmoded, and this card will have a moment. I don't think it'll make it through the standard format seeing 0 play, but it's not one of the big slam dunks of this set for me.
Yeah, next up, Basri Ket, new white Mythic Planeswalker, 1/1, 3 starting loyalty. +1, put a +1/+1 counter on up to 1 target creature. It gains indestructible until end of turn. -2, whenever 1 or more non-token creatures attack this turn, create that many 1/1 white soldier creature tokens that are tapped and attacking. And -6, you get an emblem with at the beginning of combat on your turn, create a 1/1 white soldier creature token, then put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. Ultimate, not super like game ending or anything. +1 is solid. -2, I feel like is just going to give you like a pretty reasonable burst in the mid game if things are going well, and that's basically what I want out of a card like this.
Yeah, creature explosion really happening with Basri Ket. I don't quite understand how this works with Winota yet. Does this mean more Winota triggers when these 1/1 white soldiers are attacking?
So I was talking to Nick Prince about this today, actually, and I asked him about that because I wasn't super familiar with the text on either card. Mm-hmm. So I believe Winota is whenever a non-human creature you control attacks, do the thing. And this is put them into play attacking.
Tapped and attacking. So they're not ever actually attacking to get the Winota trigger is what you're saying.
I believe so.
On this turn.
Yeah, I believe it does not work. Nick's point was, I'm pretty sure it doesn't work, but if nothing else, it's like raise the alarm that gives you more gas for the next turn.
Yep, and I think that's the way to look at it, that even if it doesn't directly enable that turn, you're just getting bigger as time goes on. And this plays well with both sides of Winota. Obviously, Winota looks a little different with the absence of Agent of Treachery from the format, but there are still like Marty Humans lists out there I see playing Winota. Basri Ket is going to be real nice there. I am afraid of Winota, which also, by the way, was emergency banned after the bans came out for Historic, which that's a mind blower. But anyway,
it's okay. It's okay.
Yeah, you're fine with it.
Well, it's not the in the top 20 of dumbest things that they've done this week, so it's fine.
Okay, there you go. Always the optimist, Gerald. I like your shiny disposition as it relates to that ban decision. But I do like this card. I think it's pretty impactful for white aggressive decks. It plays well with the themes of white aggressive decks and how they have worked recently. Gonna have some time with like Venerated Loxodon, which is nice. And I'm pretty high on this card, seeing a decent amount of play. I don't think it's a world beater, but a good solid addition to white aggressive decks.
Yeah, agreed with that. Next up, we have Basri's Lieutenant, 3-dub, 3/4, creature human knight, vigilance, protection from multicolored. When this enters the battlefield, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control, so it could be itself. And whenever this or another creature you control dies, if it had a +1/+1 counter on it, create a 2/2 white knight creature token with vigilance. A decent amount of like sweeper protection. I do feel like, especially with Basri and you mentioned Venerated Loxodon, I kind of want to do the whole like 18 land white aggro deck, not necessarily like a 24 land, like insulate myself from sweepers kind of thing. So I'm not sure if the Lieutenant is great. It is a knight, which could potentially matter.
Yeah.
But I'm more excited about versions of the deck that don't play this card.
Mostly agree. This card feels like it's floating a little bit away from that deck style and a little bit more into the mid-range, because I do think the abilities present here line up very well against a lot of the format. Obviously, this brawls very well with things like Uro, doesn't get bounced by Teferi, so that seems very important to me, at least for a few months until those rotations happen. I don't know. A lot of text on this card, and a good amount of it meaningful text for the format as it exists right now. But your investment's getting pretty high. Your immediate return on this card pretty low. And I think you just ask for immediate impact from a creature at this point. It's very hard for a creature to justify itself when it doesn't have a full spell attached to it. +1/+1 on target creature you control doesn't strike me as a full spell.
Yeah, I mean, you need to get more out of the bottom half, I think. Like that has to actually matter. So if you're playing against like Shatter the Sky or something, you can put a counter on itself, so then you get the card and a 2/2, which is kind of nice.
Yeah.
But I agree, like in any sort of creature matchup, it's like this is a fine body, it has vigilance, pro multicolored is probably going to do some stuff in combat, and then maybe the counter helps you outsize some stuff. It deters your opponent from like trading in combat potentially if you have more things that put counters on things. So I don't want to immediately dismiss this card. I do think it'll probably see some amount of play. It's just like not really where I want to be, because getting into those situations, it's not how I envision you winning most games or matchups.
A lot of the question too is how many +1/+1 counters are we going to be able to effectively throw around? Like we saw Basri Ket as one way to do it. We know Loxodon is out there, but you really need to know exactly what is surrounding this card in the format to see how well supported it is. Because you're right, I do think you need to get benefit out of that second clause.
Heliod, maybe. Like you could probably splice this with a Johnny's Pride Mate type of stuff, but
maybe.
Who knows? What else we got? Seasoned Hollowblade, 1-dub, 3/1. Creature, human warrior. Discard a card. Tap this. It gains indestructible until end of turn. This is a bad Adonto Vanguard, but that's not a bad thing.
A lot of room for Adonto Vanguard to be worse and still be playable. So kind of buy this one as another important effect. This is actually, I've built some white decks recently, and it does feel like this is the body that has been missing from them. That sticky, but still aggressive 2-drop. Without Adonto Vanguard, there just hasn't been an adequate replacement. So this certainly fits the bill.
Yep. And then Selfless Savior. This is one of my favorite cards in the set for sure. Dub 1/1.
Much better than people think it is, I think.
Dub 1/1, creature Doge. Sacrifice this, another target creature you control gains indestructible until end of turn. So if your creature deck is about setting up something like General Kudro of Dranith, or maybe you want to do like Judith things, or protect your Johnny's Pride Mate, or use Luris to bring this back, and then it can protect your Luris. I think you can get a lot of mileage out of this, and Alseid of Life's Bounty already saw a decent amount of play, and I think that for the most part, this is better.
Agree with you. Two things I really want to say about this. Can you believe this card was in the set after Luris was printed? That's just mind-blowing, because here's your Luris setup just in one package. You get Luris for the rest of the game. Congratulations. And the other thing I want to say about that is Are people just forgetting you can play companions in your main deck? Because Lurrus is a good Magic card, and I am not seeing them right now in decks, and it kind of blows my mind. And once Selfless Savior arrives, I have a feeling we're going to see a lot more, just a bunch of Lurrus in my deck, because that is a very, very real Magic card, and it doesn't have to be your companion to matter.
Yeah, you can actually just play 4 of that card. It's fine, and I kind of recommend doing so, especially when your other option right now is a companion Lurrus that costs 6. I'm not really about that life.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised to see a big uptick in Lurruses once we have Selfless Savior in the mix. Just playing fair, showing up in decks, because that card is 100% good enough to do so. Do you think that extends to older formats as well? Are people supposed to be looking at just playing Lurrus as a very good creature in Modern, maybe Legacy still? Or we're banned in Legacy. We're not getting that one back, I don't think.
Yeah, for Modern, I definitely think so. I think that there were a lot of instances where having it as your companion was just a good plan, but now that it costs a lot more mana to actually do that, it might not be worth it, and maybe you do just want to play multiple copies in like your Death and Taxes type of deck. I've already seen people doing like normal Death Shadow where they can traverse for a Lurrus. I like that idea too. So you're not playing multiple copies of Lurrus, but you sort of are with Traverse, and I think that there are a lot of decks out there that could benefit from it. Like maybe the Pioneer decks that are like Return to the Ranks, Rally the Ancestors that used to have Lurrus as a companion could just main deck some of those.
And when it comes to Standard, I think we're going to see a large number of main deck Lurruses coming up in the next year and a half or so.
Yeah, I think so too. Moving on to Blue, we have Teferi, Master of Time, 2 UU, 3 starting loyalty. Static ability is you may activate loyalty abilities of this on any player's turn anytime you could cast an instant. And +1, draw a card, then discard a card. -3, target creature you don't control phases out. Go look up the rules on phasing. And -10, take 2 extra turns after this one, which is kind of awkward with the static, but whatever.
Little bit. This one definitely took me a minute to wrap my head around. First, I didn't understand its ability, quite frankly, and I was like, oh, it seems like a pretty low loyalty, and it just didn't click. Like, I knew you could activate on your opponent's turn, but it didn't immediately register you could activate on your turn and your opponent's turn.
Right.
I don't know why I had that mental block. I guess this is the first time we've seen this ability, so it's not really super odd that I wasn't able to piece it together. But once I did, I am into Teferi, Master of Time. It does feel more like an older Planeswalker than a newer Planeswalker. And a lot of that is missing the impactful static ability, obviously, and costing 4 as opposed to 3, because that's kind of where we get our Planeswalkers now. Despite that fact, though, the 2 activations thing, that's rapid progression through your deck, and then it gets to a pretty safe loyalty plus immediate protection in terms of phasing out an opposing creature. I think Teferi does a good job of playing that old style of Magic where it does make the game about it when it comes onto the battlefield. And that used to be what like all of Standard was based around. You have this very powerful permanent, you establish it, you make the game about it, you protect it, and you pull pretty far ahead. I think Teferi is going to do a good job of that. You have to get some value out of your graveyard, I think. Thankfully, there are good cards to do that in this set, as well as things like Uro. So I am pretty into Teferi, and I think it's a really cool design, and I'm excited to at least try it out.
Yeah, it's a weird design. Like I said, I don't really like the ultimate with the static. I feel like they could have done an alt that, maybe played better with it, or at least wasn't so blatantly in opposition with it. But I do like the design a decent amount, minus bringing back phasing. I don't know if that's a thing that they're just going to do or whatever, but
I don't know. I read that as like a one-of callback to this card, which obviously has a very long historical tie to the phasing ability. And it's weird, it's quirky, it certainly will cause rules problems, but not to like the same extent as Mutate did. So
fair.
We just lived through that. We can probably live through Teferi. And here it at least feels flavorful and cool.
Yeah. You mentioned maybe you need to get some use out of your graveyard with this because Teferi is just card neutral. You're just sifting the entire time. And there's no way to actually get card advantage from it. But I also think it's worth noting that anytime you are just gaining incidental resources or extra cards from something, like, say you cast a Cultivate or whatever, and maybe you already had enough lands.
Right.
that makes Teferi that much better. So I don't know. Just look for things like that too, where it doesn't necessarily have to be graveyard oriented or bartered cow or whatever. Like I'm looking at bartered cow a lot because there's a lot of things that allow you to discard cards in this set. But
Sure.
yeah, just like anything that you don't mind discarding, even stuff just like Birth of Meletus, right? It's like, at some point you're probably just going to end up with a bunch of lands in your hand. And this does a good job of filtering through all of that nonsense.
Yeah, good way to upgrade cards. I think that's a very fine way to look at Teferi. I also just am excited to cast some Frantic Inventories for sure. So Teferi plays with that. Okay, I mean, you could probably just cast the Frantic Inventory, but still, loading up the graveyard is going to pay dividends for a lot of what Blue is doing right now.
Yeah, and Frantic Inventory is the new accumulated knowledge. When you instant draw a card, then draw cards equal to the number of cards named Frantic Inventory in your graveyard. That's a good thing. But I don't know. So there was I think it was Take Inventory. That was a sorcery speed version of this that came out, and I kind of got burned by that card just being very, very poor. And I feel like this being an instant doesn't do a whole lot to actually change that.
See, it's weird because if you had asked me if accumulated knowledge was too good to reprint, like I probably would have said yes, but not for any good reason. Just the fact that we've been through basically like Modern Horizons and it didn't make the cut there. So there's just this level of assumption. It was kind of like the Diabolic Edict effect, right? Where we go to just forever without seeing Diabolic Edict. And you're like, oh, okay, there must be something I don't understand about this card where it's way too good to reprint. And then we get Liliana's Triumph. It sees no play whatsoever. Right. And it doesn't matter whatsoever. It could be a lot of the same stuff going on with Frantic Inventory, where I had elevated this card to such a high level in my head. And then in actual application, it's just nowhere near that good.
Yeah, AK had things like Intuition and Merchant Scroll, and I guess Sapphire Medallion too, to some degree, going for it. Mm-hmm. And
but it still sees occasional play, even in like Legacy. You see it in the Miracles decks for sure.
Those Miracles decks are built so poorly, and AK is not even the tip of the iceberg. In Standard, the games also went pretty long, and you had Fact or Fiction too, so you would just like tear through your deck at a rapid pace. And in Standard, it just doesn't seem like you're going to be AKing for 3 all that often. But yeah, I mean, if you get to Teferi away the first one, you draw the second one, 2 mana draw 2, that's solid. I could see that. But the Teferi decks that I'm interested in are also just like Urian decks. So I'd rather just play Omen of the Sea anyway, even though I'm not very high on Omen of the Sea, but whatever.
Yeah, there's going to be some tension. That's the thing when all the cards are really good.
That's great. We have deck building decisions and they matter.
That's good.
Cool.
Gotta love that.
All right. Archfiend's Vessel, a.k.a. Sam Black's Invitational card. Actually, this card might win the game too quickly to be Sam Black's Invitational card.
You just want to play around with your permanents for a little bit longer before you actually...
Yeah. So, B1/1, Creature Human Cleric, Lifelink. When this enters the battlefield, if it entered from your graveyard or you cast it from your graveyard, exile it. If you do, create a 5/5 black demon creature token with flying. There's a decent amount of ways to reanimate this, and it kind of feels the same to me as like the Frantic Inventory thing, where it's like if you build your deck with a ton of ways to reanimate it, but you don't actually find it or find multiple copies of it, then it is kind of sad. But thankfully, there's just things like Luris and Call of the Death Dweller that are just incidentally good, and you should just play them anyway.
Look, I'm only going to do this for 1 week. I promise after this, I will stop doing this. But the idea that you print one of the best Magic cards ever made and then just jam it full of the hardest support you possibly can in the next set with Archfiend's Vessel and the Protection Hound, it's kind of crazy. I think that would have been a sizable part of Standard, and maybe it still would be because you can just, like I said, play your main deck Lurises. There's a pretty nice black-white deck coming together here with 4 Lurises, and you can do like the Cruel Celebrant type stuff and still do Priest for a while, and mushing all of that together seems very exciting to me, and the power level seems like it's getting there with these really, really juiced Luris targets. So I think that you're not going to hard build around the Vessel, but there's enough ways to play this incidentally and still get value from like the front side, the 1/1 little body, that this will be a player.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a lot of these black sacrifice decks played 1-drops that they didn't particularly want to, just things like Gutter Bones. Whisper Squad was fine, but not great. And it's just like, oh, okay, well, I'll just play this. And I was on the fence between how many Call of the Death Dwellers I wanted to play. I guess I'm just upping that number by 1 now pretty easily. And you talked about trying to convince people to play more Lurises in their main deck. Well, there you go.
Yeah, very easy way to make that argument.
We also have Eliminate, 1B instant, destroy target creature or planeswalker with converted mana cost 3 or less. This card is nice.
Best removal spell we've seen in a very long time, because this is actually what Magic is about. You need to be able to answer things like Teferi, like Narset, like the new 3-mana planeswalker we're getting in this set. So this feels like a big upgrade. Now, every set, there is a removal spell where I'm like, ooh, this is really good. We just had Heartless Act, which I also thought was quite good as a removal spell. Saw almost no play whatsoever. So
that's not true.
In Standard, it sees virtually no play. Like occasional 1 to 2 copies in a deck that's probably not very good.
I mean, dude, it was index. Like, just because, so like the black decks were like these companion aggro decks, and now they're not that anymore. And if you are incentivized to play removal spells, I think you would have Heartless Act.
Okay. Maybe it's more about not being incentivized to play those spells and less about the actual quality of the card. But this beats a lot of those concerns as well, because you have a fail state of killing Teferi, killing Narset. So as long as those cards are part of the format, I expect Eliminate to be around and see more play than removal spells have seen recently.
Yeah. And it is awkward, obviously, if they Teferi bounce your thing and then you have to eliminate it at some point in the future, or Narset, they get a card and then you eliminate it. It's not a perfect answer, but it's better than just those things being alive for the entire time and you not being able to do anything about it. So I'm happy that this exists, and this is a pretty big pickup for any of like the Sultai ramp decks, you know, where they basically just like couldn't really deal with opposing planeswalkers that well. And now you just have this clean thing that can replace the Heartless Act or Tyrant Scorn that they used to play, and it's not completely dead against opposing mid-range or control decks. So this card is nice.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what this card does going forward. Once War of the Spark leaves the format, if it still has a home. I expect we won't be seeing as many 3-mana planeswalkers, but I said that before War of the Spark, so we'll see what happens. Right.
We also have Grasp of Darkness. I recommend targeting creatures that have 4 toughness or less.
Ooh, good strategy insights. That's what the people are here for, to get that cutting insight that you offer, Gerald.
But yeah, that card's solid. Grim Tutor, which I think does nothing.
It's weird, right? That's another one of those that, oh, this card must be too powerful, but it's not. I mean, this will be fine. It'll occasionally see play, but losing a mana off of Diabolical Tutor doesn't really do a whole lot for me right now.
All right, curious what you have to say about this one. Liliana, Waker of the Dead, 2BB, 4 starting loyalty, Legendary Planeswalker Liliana, +1. Each player discards a card, which could be a bartered cow, and each opponent who can't loses 3 life if you ran out of cows. -3, target creature gets -X until end of turn, where X is the number of cards in your graveyard, and -7, you get an emblem with, at the beginning of combat on your turn, put target creature card from a graveyard onto the battlefield. Under your control, it gains haste.
Here's the thing. You cannot play Resource Denial in Standard. It's almost impossible to do so. I've tried so hard. There is like Croxa and Duress and Heartless Act, or excuse me, Agonizing Memories, Agonizing Remorse, Drill Bit. Yes, all of these ways to eat up a hand, and I believed wholeheartedly that this was something realistic you could do. I built so many decks around it, and they all failed. Now, a lot of that was the fact that Companion made that idea laughable. There was no way you were ever going to run anyone out of resources. But it's a lot about how all of Standard is built. And that's a very challenging thing, to just eat everything your opponent can possibly do and control the game that way. But this kind of feels like it's there. The power level feels good enough. I mean, we were kind of missing this persistent effect, a way to really tighten the vice when your opponent did get low on resources. They'd have
Yeah.
some explosion and build back up. We didn't have Liliana to really close the door. Now we do. I still think there are some cards that make this very challenging. Things like Hydroid Krasis being around continue to be a problem. Nissa still exists, so that leads to very large explosions of not only pressure on your Liliana, but also eventually cards translated through Hydroid Krasis or Uro. So it doesn't feel like this is going to be a slam dunk out of the gates, but long term, I believe there will be a home for this card.
I feel like this is a card that I should like, and I just don't. Part of the reason is that the -3 on a turn 4 Liliana is just not really going to do anything.
Yeah, probably not. It's a very small removal spell.
So that really worries me. Makes it seem like if you just look at it like, oh, the +1 is like Liliana the Veil plus a clock. The -3 is a removal spell. The ultimate probably ends the game. And it's like, well, it's not really that though, because the minus is so bad. And 4 is a lot. There's a lot of competition at 4 mana. And I just don't think that this Liliana is going to make it.
I don't think it incidentally makes it. I think there can be decks built around Liliana which may have success. That's where I fall on this card. I don't think on its face it's just like powerful enough to justify itself. You have to really focus on making a deck to maximize this card. Like I said, there needs to be some changes to the format before I expect that strategy to work, but the power level is there to me.
Village Rites, be instant as an additional cost to cast this spell, sack a creature, draw 2 cards. What do you think?
Very good. Surprisingly good. And taking a mana off of this effect, this usually costs us 2. Getting down to 1 is a big get. We have a lot of cheap creatures we can burn through. The aforementioned Luris stuff. It feels like we are getting down to some really tiny converted mana costs, and we're going to have a lot of play on our turns. There's plenty of disposable creatures like Whisper Squad out there if we want to go that route. So I believe this is a real source of card advantage, and at 1 mana, good enough for standard play 100%, maybe even reaching into older formats.
Yeah, I actually think it's more likely to hit in older formats than in standard. Like playing the sacrifice decks in standard, like obviously you have ways to sacrifice your things for value, but most of the time it was about like building up your board position and then cashing in on the sacrifice effects, not just like, oh, play out my Cauldron Familiar and then just like immediately burn it to draw 2 cards. It's like that doesn't really get you anywhere. So I'm very hesitant to just like load up a standard deck that has like 4 copies of this. I think I'd rather be playing to the board more, and then in older formats with things like Stitcher Supplier, it's like, oh, okay, like this card is actually pretty attractive.
Yeah, I buy that. It's very efficient. 1 mana, you start looking at 1 mana spells that get you 2 cards. I think it merits a lot of consideration in a lot of places. Agree that present standard sacrifice decks may not be interested in this, but there's going to be rebuild of that deck. We look at the tools available here. I expect a very different take going forward for what the sacrifice decks are looking like, just because they've gotten such good payoffs in this particular set.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's definitely true. We are going to see a lot of innovation and probably a lot of different versions too when it's all said and done.
Mm-hmm.
On to red, we have Chandra, Heart of Fire, 3 RR, 5 starting loyalty, +1. Discard your hand, then exile the top 3 cards of your library until end of turn. You may play cards exiled this way. +1, this deals 2 damage to any target. And -9, search your library and graveyard for any number of red instants and or sorceries. Exile them, shuffle your library. You may cast them this turn, add 6R.
So I wrote about this card this week because when I saw it, I was pretty excited about it. And as I spent more time thinking about the card, building around the card, I actually think it has a lot of problems. And a lot of the problems are how this interacts with the rest of the cards in the typical red decks that you would include Chandra in. A lot of what I wanted to do was just burn a lot of resources early, use Chandra mostly as a way to control the battlefield, but also have access to the discard outlet that Chandra provided, and then set up things like Elspeth Conquers Death on Ugin, like doing a lot of big red type stuff. But a lot of the cards you want to play in those type of strategies do not work well with Chandra whatsoever. Like you want some redundant discard outlets. So you look at things like Thrill of Possibility, and it's like, oh, that card just doesn't work. Like, period, does not work with Chandra. It's really hard to get the -9 to actually kill someone. Like, you can do Slaying Fire type stuff, which is what a lot of my decks did. But I mean, if you're keeping a Chandra around to 9 loyalty anyway, you've probably done enough and generated enough value that you don't really have to worry about the ultimate being lethal. I do think the 2 damage to any target is way better than people think it is.
Kills planeswalkers.
Picking off planeswalkers is a huge part of the thing, but also just adding a bunch of reach to your deck. It goes really well in like a mid-range strategy where you get some chip damage in early, and then Chandra can just come down and finish the job. It creates multiple points of pressure. So I'm somewhere in the middle on this card. I wouldn't say I expect it to be a focal point. It had me interested in building a bunch of decks around it. I found a Jeskai deck that I thought was pretty interesting. Again, the same Ugin, Chandra, Elspeth Conquers Death type stuff, but using Urian still and Thirst for, what is the enchantment? Thirst for Knowledge, Thirst for Meaning. Thank you. Using those type of setups for my Ugin reanimation or Chandra reanimation. It all seemed fine, but not completely over the moon on this Chandra yet.
This card would be pretty good with fires, yeah?
Every card is good with fires, Gerry. That's really not a high bar.
Just throwing that out there. Chandra's Pyreling, 1R, 1/3, creature elemental wizard. Whenever a source you control deals non-combat damage to an opponent, this gets +1/+0 and gains double strike until end of turn. This is a pretty aggressively costed 2-drop.
Cheap double strike is very sneaky and can do a lot of damage very quickly. So wouldn't sleep on this one. I don't have a home for it yet, but I am always aware of cheap ways to get creatures double strike.
Yeah, it's not super easy to enable, but I don't know. I feel like we could probably get there.
Probably.
All right, scrolling down through all of these bad red cards.
No. You got to scroll back because I want to talk about the card right after Chandra's Pyreling. I need to know your opinion on Conspicuous Snoop. I will allow you to do the honors of revealing this card.
RR22, creature goblin rogue. Play with the top card of your library revealed. You may cast goblin spells from the top of your library as long as the top card of your library is a goblin card. This has all activated abilities of that card. This is busted, obviously, but not in standard.
Just a modern card, just a legacy card, maybe, all that good stuff.
Pioneer, maybe, historic, probably.
Boggart Harbinger is $15 presently. That did not take long.
Come on.
If you're not in on the joke, basically you put a Kiki Jiki on the top of your library. If your Conspicuous Snoop does not have summoning sickness, you basically win the game on the spot, assuming it survives. So people really like quote unquote Splinter Twins. Everything's a Splinter Twin. This ignores the best part of Splinter Twin in that it doesn't come down as an instant. This is a Devoted Druid Vizier combo, but with a really good B plan. So I actually am a believer in this deck for the modern format. It seems solid to me. There's a good solid base there, good aggressive goblins deck. You have Ether Vial stuff. You can do Chalice stuff. So this seems like a meaningful print for sure.
It is just not in standard, but I do think it is potentially busted.
We shall see.
Cultivate. Reprint, 2G sorcery, search your library for up to 2 basic land cards, reveal them, put one on the battlefield tapped, the other into your hand, then shuffle your library. I mean, this is green divination. It accelerates you. We already have a lot of good ramp options, including Uro, but this does something a little bit different, and I think is going to see a lot of play, maybe not as a 4 of, but certainly in relatively high numbers.
This is an incredible ramp spell. If you've played with this before, I'm not telling you anything you don't know. This is a reprint. It does that trick you talked about with Teferi, where you get a card to upgrade in card quality later on. So that's something to note. We are going to have to replace Growth Spiral. That's probably for the best.
Do you mean in our decks currently? Because that's not happening.
No. I mean when it leaves. I am thinking of things mostly at rotation right now. Maybe I'm way too far ahead of myself and should slow my roll.
Yes.
But I really can't wait for rotation. So
I understand.
It's a lot of where my head is at presently. But I don't think Cultivate will hop into decks immediately because Growth Spiral is so good. It'll take some time to get going. Like you said, maybe 1 of 2 of. But I would assume upon rotation, Cultivate, too good not to see play.
Dude, like Sultai and these Bant ramp decks, they will love this card, especially if they're playing Urian and you just have a bunch of slots already. I think this is good in Wilderness Reclamation. Basically, like a lot of my decks have had like 3 Uro and 2 Cultivate. But
okay, so you're coming out with it right away.
Yeah, in 80 card decks, I could see going harder on it depending on what you're trying to do.
Right. Certainly very different restrictions on 80 card decks. You're trying to accomplish a lot of redundancy and you need to go a lot deeper in these type of effects. So certainly with Urian, expect to see this card.
There's a Garruk too that has not been translated fully, so I don't know what Liberto actually translates to, but it's 2 GG, 4 starting loyalty, +1, up to 1 target creature gets +3/+3 and gains trample until end of turn, -2, create a 3/3 green beast creature token. Then if an opponent controls more creatures than you, put a loyalty counter on this, and -7, create an emblem with, at the beginning of your end step, you may search your library for a creature card, put it on the battlefield, and shuffle your library.
The -2 is very interesting to me, and I don't really know what to make of it right now. But I think even if that was just a straight up -1, I would have this Garruk a little bit lower on the present Planeswalker scale. That's not to say it's bad. Like, certainly 2 years ago, I probably would have been all about this card, but the barrier is just so high for entry into Standard right now. Any type of aggressive mono green deck will look at Garruk. I am not incentivized to play an aggressive mono green deck just because Garruk exists, though. Although apparently that's the hotness right now. A lot of people playing Giant Growth again in Standard. Who knew that was coming? But maybe that continues.
Sir Farron is busted. That's all you got to know.
Powerful creature.
Dude, Heroic Intervention is a nice little reprint for those decks too. You have some
good little
sweeper
tools. Good little tools for these green decks.
There's also an upgraded Prey Upon. That's like kind of cool, but not really doing a whole lot to incentivize me to play the deck either. So
yeah, and if you were playing it, I think it has less to do with this Garruk and more about making this like a fine addition, maybe even a sideboard card where you just need some staying power against control decks. I don't know. Not a slam dunk for me, but an interesting card. And I really like the approach of the -2. I find that I like these kind of modal activations that change in scale depending on your opponent's battlefield. I think that's interesting. Unexplored space.
Yeah, we need more timely reinforcements. That card was so sick.
Always with the timely reinforcements.
Listen, outside of it being completely busted and that card winning me tens of thousands of dollars, there probably should be more of that design space explored where it's modal depending on what's happening in the game.
Agreed. I do think it is an interesting space.
Anyway, Llanowar Visionary, 2G, 2/2, Elf Druid. When this enters the battlefield, draw a card, tap, add G. Like kind of busted, but also in the same set as Cultivate. I don't know how to feel about this one. I feel like if you're a Simic, like creature-based version, kind of what we've seen before, I think this card's a slam dunk, but the other options are also just very strong.
Yeah, creature-ish combo setups, things like the Mutate deck come to mind. They could really benefit from a card like this. I don't know, little fragility built in, but immediately replaces itself. This is a unique card. I expect, again, had this been 2 to 3 years ago, I'd probably be over the moon about this card. As it stands right now, it's going to compete with a lot of options, but I do expect this to find a home.
Cool. On to the artifacts. We can talk about the Solemn Simulacrum reprint.
Love this card. One of my all-time favorite cards, actually. Just enjoy playing with it. I'm happy to put a Solemn Simulacrum into play. What do you think about its odds in present Standard?
100%.
Yeah?
Yeah. Any Urian deck, any sort of rampy deck, I think it's probably quite good. It pairs well with Ugin. You do kind of run into the problem where you just have too many good ramp options, which I don't know. I mean, that's fine, I suppose. But even like the control decks, like, I don't know, maybe Azorius Control can play this.
Yeah, my Chandra, Ugin, Elspeth Conquers Death decks were very into this card. Pretty happy to return it to the battlefield multiple times, and you benefit from having tons of mana in play. So I expect this to see play. If it doesn't, I'm going to be really disappointed because, like I said, one of my all-time favorite Magic cards.
I would be shocked, completely shocked. Like, this card would almost certainly make my top 10 list if we were putting reprints on it. So
Okay.
how do you feel about Mazemind Tome? Do you feel like I'm going to like this card?
This looks a lot like a treasure map to me, so I'm sure you're just all in.
2 generic mana artifact. Tap, put a page counter on this, scry 1. 2 tap, put a page counter on this, draw a card. When there are 4 or more page counters on this, exile it. If you do, gain 4 life.
Go off. Tell us why there will be 4 of these in every deck you build for the foreseeable future.
So this card is kind of small ball, right? If our opponents are doing wilderness reclamation things, or fires, if that still existed, then this isn't really what you want to be doing, because you'll just get caught up, right? Like, you need to play Narset, Teferi, these things that give you an advantage while also kind of stopping your opponent from doing what they're doing, whereas the Tome is just going to sit there and do nothing. But I don't think that all of the games will necessarily be like that. This better have been in your Chandra Ugin deck.
It wasn't. I don't know if it wasn't previewed or I just wasn't into this.
Yeah, it was one of the first cards previewed, man.
I just wasn't about it then.
You saw treasure map, you kept on going.
Right.
This is really good with Urian. This will be in all the Urian decks, hands down.
Interesting. One of the big things I do like about this card is that with Magic cards being as powerful as they presently are, you are super incentivized to never, ever, under any circumstances, miss a land drop. And I like the fact that this comes down on 2 and gets you an immediate free scry to make sure you hit that 3rd land, because you can't miss.
It gets you 2. You can upkeep it too.
That is true. Yeah. So really guarantees that you get paid in that spot. Doing a little bit of like the Birth of Meletus thing, still playing well with Urian. So maybe I was too low on this card. I don't know. It does feel like a fairer form of Magic, like you conceded, but there will be games that go down that fair route. And look, the like Bant, rampy mirror type stuff is fairish. Like it trends towards fair. Certainly games go very long. Card advantage matters. Granted, you usually have more of it than you need, but you could see Mazemind Tome finding a home under that context.
I wouldn't necessarily start 4 of this card, and Omen of the Sea might be better just because it just immediately replaces itself, right? And that's a little bit better than having to pay 2 mana to do it. But I do feel like this card supplements them quite well. And if the format ever moves towards those games mattering more, like there are more Bant mirrors or Azorius mirrors or whatever, I think the number of copies will tick up.
Okay. You're getting 4 cards out of your 2-drop. That's a really good return.
Well, 7, because you do it 3 times and then blink it.
And then you're going to blink it. You got it.
So anyway, yeah, solid card. This card would not be in my top 10, just to be clear. But
okay.
It does exist. It does do things. Sparkhunter Masticore. 3 mana, 3 generic mana, artifact creature Masticore, 3/4. As an additional cost to cast this spell, discard a card, perhaps a bartered cow. Protection from planeswalkers. 1 mana, this deals 1 damage to target planeswalker. 3 mana, this gains indestructible until end of turn. This is like good stats, a lot of words. You can potentially use your graveyard somehow, and I just still don't think that this is very good.
That's interesting. I'm higher on this card. I think as long as planeswalkers remain a focal point, this effectively manages them. And again, think about the context of present standard. Masticore plays well through all the removal that's being played. You can give it indestructible in response to something like a sweeper effect. It outsizes Deafening Clarion. And a lot of decks are just banking really hard on Teferi being their source of removal. They just want to buy time. They just want to stall you. And Sparkhunter Masticore makes that impossible. So it certainly feels like a card for the present moment. It's hard for me to see this extending into the future. But the other thing I'll point out too, I mentioned how you just don't run out of cards in hand. Like that hasn't really been a concern for a while in the standard. And under those guidelines, well, there's not much of a real drawback on Sparkhunter Masticore. And if it's a mirror is ever about just establishing planeswalker dominance, Sparkhunter Masticore is going to insert itself in a very major way. I like the size and I like the body. I'm pretty high on this card.
3 is a lot to give it indestructible. If people are playing more removal spells. I mean, like we've already seen like Glass Casket show up a little bit in main decks and then have the rest of the copies be filled out in the sideboard. And then we're talking about Eliminate and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. I'm certainly not very happy to invest in this on turn 3 and then just have it get killed immediately. But if we do live in a world where Teferi is the main way in which decks interact in the early game, then yes, obviously this card is very good against strictly Teferi. And
if nothing else, it pushes towards honesty, right? Like the fact that this is a must answer for several decks incentivizes things like Glass Casket. And I think that's a net positive for the format for sure.
I agree. Anything that creates churn is good, but I'm not super happy to just jam a bunch of these in my decks from the get, you know? Mm-hmm. But we'll see. And then we have Ugin, the Spirit Dragon, 8 mana, does all the things card. How do you feel about this one?
It's really good. What else is there to say? This is a incredible payoff at 8 mana.
Dude, it's really good, right? It's really good.
Elspeth Conquers Death is out there and setting you up for basically immediate ultimates. It comes in at 8 loyalty, you +2 Ugin, sitting at 10, you minus, and then you get 7 life, draw 7 cards, and put up to 7 permanents from your hand onto the battlefield just the turn after it comes down. I was doing the Ugin Chandra stuff I mentioned. Sparkhunter Masticore was a part of that as well, being able to just like reliably get this into your graveyard. I don't know how much it matters that you're reanimating this with Elspeth Conquers Death, but it just assures you always have an Ugin, and if your opponent isn't a deck that can challenge you through colorless permanents or, potentially survive through Ugin, which not many can, this just seems like an endgame for a lot of decks in the format.
Yeah, I mean, another bonus part in Masticore's camp is that, it doesn't die to Ugin being an artifact and everything, right. And we might need to look for threats like that a little bit more, because the way that most decks were constructed, Ugin would be able to come down, use its minus, and then just not be threatened immediately. So you need something to either finish it off with direct damage or some sort of haste creature or something. Like, you need to be able to react to this. And yeah, Elspeth Conquers Death is interesting because most of the time people never were concerned about killing the enchantment. It was always like, all right, they'll get a Teferi back or a Narset back, and I'll just have to deal with that. But dealing with an Ugin, especially with an extra counter on it, is going to prove to be a lot more difficult. So maybe you just need to be able to kill Elspeth Conquers Death now too.
Yeah, I think more than any other card, this kind of will shape what the format is about. You will have to contemplate this end game. Ramp was already very good, but having a very clearly beneficial end state will work really well for those decks. Obviously, this was like a Pioneer staple early on. Just early Ugins were completely backbreaking there. We've seen plenty of it in Modern, in Tron, and I expect we'll see plenty of it in this Standard. I am looking forward to a point where you can interact with Ugin on the stack and Teferi doesn't lock out things like Disdainful Stroke.
Yeah.
Because you can't really come out ahead when you're trying to answer an Ugin that's already hit the battlefield.
Yeah, those will be the days when Teferi's actually gone. But yeah, Ugin, especially in a world with Cultivate and Solemn Simulacrum, and we already have...
Another card that doesn't die to Ugin, by the way.
Yeah, well, I mean, true. It's kind of a body that's a little bit too small to really have me be convinced that it's going to be like an Ugin answer or whatever, but it's also a card that you can play alongside Ugin and be able to protect Ugin from like a mobilized district or something. So
Right. And gets you to 8 mana too, which is a big deal.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be relevant. So we have a lot of ramp options, and this is probably going to be one of the better payoffs,
I think I'm okay with that. I'm okay with Ugin being something important. There are enough reliable cards you could go to inhibit Ugin's effectiveness that I like that being a focal point. We have Sorcerous Spyglass. We have things like Banishing Light. There are the Black Mythos as ways to like directly answer it. There's plenty of stuff out there that we can go to if Ugin becomes too much of the format, and it'll feel good to have a really clear focal point, I think.
Yeah, man, I agree completely. I'm happy that this card exists. It is cool. I probably going to register this at some point. I would not be surprised at all.
Yeah, this is in my range.
And then for lands, we have the Enemy Temples, Fabled Passage, and Radiant Fountain. Radiant Fountain may or may not do anything, but it's still cool that it exists for like control decks or colorless decks or Heliod decks. It is interesting to me that Temples and Fabled Passage are the lands that are in this set. I'm not really happy about it, and I don't think it makes a lot of sense, right? Like in the age of Arena, I remember when I was just like getting my Arena account started, and like Ravnica comes out, and so much of your rare wild cards are tied up into trying to get the dual lands, especially if you're trying to build decks with multiple colors. It's like I want to have a Boros deck and a Simic deck, and it's like, boom, all your rare wild cards are gone, right? So like, why would you make these the dual lands rather than something that makes me eat up more wild cards?
So your concern is that they're not coming after your wild cards aggressively enough?
I'm just shocked that they aren't.
So a lot of people are upset about the inclusion of these cards because they see it as like a burned wild card or a burned rare slot, because there is no duplicate protection on something like Temple of Silence. If you have 4 copies, you end up with 8 copies, and you can't do anything with the copies 5 through 8.
Sure. Okay. That does kind of make sense. But like that's just, it's better. That's a better scenario than what I'm talking about, right? Where it's like, you're already going to have the dual lands. And then if you open them, you're not opening a new card that has value to you, but then you also don't have to spend wild cards to fill out the rest of them.
Right. So you lose on both ends when it comes to this particular setup. I've heard this complaint a lot. Here's what I'm going to say about it. With the release of Ikoria and the addition of human drafts, I built all of Ikoria and didn't spend any money and have more gems in my account than I did when the set started. And I'm not like sitting in high mythic. I don't play all the time. I just drafted a bunch when the set came out, won a lot, and basically parlayed that into having every single card in the set with no dollar investment. It feels to me like Arena is pretty generous right now. Like, not super generous. It doesn't really compare with something like Legends of Runeterra, which I think is just an awesome economy that is very clear, very direct. You get to buy the cards you want. It is now. There was one of its huge sticking points at first, but they fixed it. They got it to a place where it's very good.
Yes.
So I don't hate the way the Arena economy is set up right now. I think it's like striking a nice balance of being accessible and still justifying its existence by making Wizards some money, which is obviously an important part of the equation. So I don't want to like naysay these complaints. They're valid. Certainly it sucks to have 5 through 8 worthless cards in your account, but I am pretty happy with the shape of the Arena economy right now, I have to say.
So I think that you could have done what you were talking about doing with draft before human drafts. I think the difference is this set you actually played.
Well, yeah, I'm not miserable. That is the difference. I agree with you.
Okay, so it's easier to play because
yes,
the games are not as ridiculous. But
yes.
Okay, so that makes sense. If people are going to complain that they're going to open a useless card, I think that Wizards just at that point should force you to get new dual lands with every set. Like they shouldn't be reprinting any duels.
I don't know. I mean, that ignores a lot of the reasons they might have reprinted these duels. It could be for gameplay considerations. It could be...
No, absolutely. I agree. It's like, okay, yeah, temples are fine to be here. They're good to have in standard. They're fine to stick around. I think that we have wanted some untapped dual lands for a while, and this could have been a pretty reasonable place to put them. It's like we've spent so much time, maybe even in the last 2 years, but definitely, the last 2 years, but definitely in the last year, where we don't have a lot of good aggressive options. And if you print like some fast lands or something, and now aggro is real in the format, it's like, well, that creates like a very exciting last 3 months of the format, right?
Yeah. Look, I am obviously pro shakeups right now, and I think my stance on ban 8 cards in standard made that pretty clear. I would love a huge shakeup. Obviously, the approach presently is more conservative than that, and we don't know what's coming in the next set. It's really hard for us to understand why temples were the choice without seeing the entire big picture. Someone remind us a year and a half from now to go back and reevaluate this decision to have temples be the rare land in this set and see if we can make heads or tails of it.
Yeah, man, I'm shocked. I thought my rare wild cards were just never going to be safe, but I think they're kind of safe now.
rares are no longer a pressure point for me. It is the mythics now, which is
Yes.
probably how it should be. But there was a period where that wasn't that case, and that was basically due to lands when you had to fill out your mana bases. Everyone was short on rare wildcards for a long time.
Yeah, and I agree with you. Now it's mostly evened out where I'm, it's like I'll have like 8 mythics and like 20 rares and obviously thousands or whatever of commons and uncommons, but that's more in line with just having 0 rares and like 40 mythic rare wildcards, and it's like, what is this economy even? Like, I don't understand.
Now, do you burn your commons and uncommons when the set releases?
Sometimes. I know it's technically correct. It's just not a good use of my time, I don't think.
Right. It's not clear to me how big the return is. Also, things like that where it's technically correct to do this kind of rote process, and if you know about it, you do it. If you don't, you just lose value, are real feel bads. And I would look very carefully if there was a way to eliminate that from the system, because it's just like a knowledge gap. And if you have the knowledge, you get a few extra points. If you don't, you just have more uncommon and common wildcards than you could ever possibly use.
Right. Yeah, it's strange to me. And for people who don't know, it is technically correct where if you have a bunch of common and uncommon wildcards, that when a new set comes out, you should use those wildcards to craft all the commons and uncommons in the new set and then start opening packs, because it will fill your vault faster.
Yeah. Weird little system.
But I'm not trying to click 30,000 times to get like 2% of my vault. I'm just not going to do that.
I know your time is valuable, Gerald. Use it as you see fit.
I'm not even going to try and say that my time is valuable, because I haven't been doing a whole lot of worth as of late. But I still don't want to waste the time that I do have doing stuff like that for the smallest amount of equity possible.
I feel you.
Yeah, that's about it. Radiant Fountain's dope. I'm going to put that in some decks. It's probably going to be bad, but whatever.
Oh, I've played a lot of Radiant Fountains and usually very, very happy with it. So I'm sure that it'll make the cut for me as well.
Very, very happy with it. Okay.
Oh yeah. I played it in Blue-Black Control, like post-Magic Origins, and loved it there. I've certainly played it enough in Amulet and gained dozens of life off my Radiant Fountains. So big fan of this card.
Obviously, it's busted in Amulet. We're not going to debate that. But that Blue-Black Control deck, you should feel bad. Andrew Brown should feel bad. Pearl Lake Ancient should feel bad.
Deck was so good.
No, it was heinous. Perilous Vault. Oh my god, what a horrific Magic card.
Top-notch removal spell, for sure.
Well, that is going to do it for this week's Core Set 21 previews. Hopefully next week we also just get a bunch of bangers. I'm excited. And we're going to close out the episode, as always, with a question from the fine folks in our Discord. And the person who we arbitrarily select is going to get an Arena Deckless enamel pin in the mail at some point. I promise. And the question we selected this week comes from Troy, and Troy wants to know, what is your favorite core set of all time? To me, they all just blend together. I'm just going to say this one, because this one does genuinely have me excited, and I think that there are both new and old cards that are like exist on all parts of the spectrum, from like aggro to control to combo, and I'm just stoked. And a lot of the reprints got me very, very excited. So I don't know, maybe looking back, I'm going to be like, oh, okay, yeah, that one I guess was my favorite because it had like Preordain and Lightning Bolt and all these busted cards or whatever. But as far as like juicing my excitement for Magic and like getting me building decks, this one nails it.
Agree. The reprints here are just swing for the fences reprints, without a doubt. Obviously, this was a very key component of this set. They were looking for splashy, exciting cards to bring back, and I think thus far they have succeeded. And as you said, plenty more to go. So I think that's a respectable answer. I'm not going to shame that at all. For me, a few core sets stand out as really getting me excited. The first one's a little weird. I remember being very excited about 10th edition because it went back to black bordered, and there were a bunch of cards I wanted in black border. So at the time, I was really into 10th edition, and things like Painlands come to mind. I think Painlands were in 10th edition. And
you blew it, right?
How so?
Because back then, the way to get black border cards was to get the foil versions.
Right. Yeah, this predates my foil obsession.
I know. I'm saying, like, you could have just been on that train for the past 20 years or whatever.
Those are very valuable now, too. I really did blow that one. Well,
anyway, continue.
Still, in the moment, very excited for the black bordered cards. Things like Wrath of God was a very big deal to me.
Portal. Alpha.
Portal. Sure. Well, I was not particularly rich, so alpha was not an option. Even at the repressed alpha prices of that time, I probably couldn't swing a Wrath of God.
It was like $10 or something, probably. It was
no, not by the time 10th edition came out. I don't think we're at the $10 alpha Wrath of God stage. I would guess someone find an old Inquest. I'm going to guess it was $70 at that point. That's my guess.
Yeah, you might be right. That's a lot for Wrath of God. I remember the Portal one being like 15 or something, and I had one.
For the longest time, I saw Magic cards as game pieces, and all I cared about was their function. It was not about aesthetics for me. I just wanted to be able to play the cards in events, and even at that point, events were pretty rare for me, so it wasn't even super important. I possessed the cards, but some cards I did have an emotional attachment to, and I remember Black-Bordered Wrath of God, for whatever reason, had me excited. But for the most part, it was just give me the cheapest version available. And then at this point, the black bordered versions became the cheapest version. So I was able to get rid of the ugly white bordered versions. Another core set, 2010 felt really special to me. And I think it's because it's about the time I started getting really invested in competitive Magic again. And it was a very big return to the classic Magic themes. I really appreciated that. I was playing a lot with my brother and cousin at the time, who were also the people I played with in like 94 and 95. So for them, it was resonant as well to return to classic Shiv and Dragon type stuff. So I must have bought like 5 or 6 boxes of Core Set 2010 just because I was so into it. And we would just do 3-man drafts, and we drafted a lot of Core Set 2010. And I remember enjoying it. So who knows if that actually holds up. But a Core Set draft that I really definitely did enjoy, Magic Origins, I thought was a pretty good draft format, and I drafted that quite a bit and liked it. So that's my hierarchy of core sets.
Yeah, Origins was nice. Origins did not feel like a core set, and the draft environment was hyper aggro. So I liked it initially, but it didn't have a whole lot of replayability. Okay.
Yeah, I was into it very hard for a short period, and then out of it pretty quickly after that because I was very busy at work at the time. So basically once the Pro Tour ended, I got away from it. But during that very brief period, I remember being really into that limited format.
Yeah, that was one of the few limited formats where I actually beat Raptor in a sanctioned match. So I guess it's got to be a great format.
Yeah, that's just the unequivocal way to tell. It's just a slam dunk format. I 6-0'd the PT draft, so it's definitely a great format based on that.
I 3-0'd the first one, and I won at least one round. I think I might have went 1 and 2 in the second one, but against Raptor, still had all these languishes. Didn't even need them. It was
nice.
Great. Yeah,
got him.
That's it, I guess. That's game.
Sure. That's game.
Good luck.